Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Once again, I am Shelby Bush, Chairman of We the People USA Alliance. And with me today is Chris Hansel. He is the Director of IT and Data for We the People USA Alliance.
Hi, guys.
So today we're going to talk about mail-in ballots. And I know there's been a lot of controversy around mail-in ballots and whether or not we should, as a whole in this country, accept mail-in ballots. And I think before we kind of get into that, we need to talk about the fact there's three different types of mail-in voting, right? There's, you got Oregon and Washington, which is all mail-in ballots. They don't even have poll centers, do they, Chris?
That's right. Yeah, it's all mail-in, right?
And then we've got like a Texas model, which is absentee voting, where you have to have an excuse. So you have to be in the military, you have to be working out of state, you have to be basically confined. You have to be what they consider a confined voter, somebody who's elderly or health is failing. And then you've got places like Arizona, where we're kind of a hybrid. We still have voting centers, but we have no excuse absentee voting, which means anybody, including clone voters or voters who have moved, can and will receive a mail-in ballot if they sign up for it. And so when we talk about mail-in ballot as a whole, we're really more speaking to mail-in balloting kind of as a carte blanche, right? Not including those kind of exceptions for military, which we always want to make sure they have the opportunity to vote, and those that are disabled or infirm and unable to actually go into a poll center and vote. So mail-in balloting as a whole, I believe personally, it's criminal. It's truly criminal. And I think that it is the number one way that our elections are subverted. I think it's an affront to the American people and the voting process to allow this kind of abuse to occur in our system. What are your thoughts on all of that, Chris?
Well, part of the problem with mail-in voting is some of what we're going to talk about today is signature verification. How do you validate that you're getting the right ballots from the right people and that ballots aren't finding their way in that aren't legitimate? And you know, there's been the opinion for years on both sides of the aisle that mail-in voting is the easiest way to cheat, and so you want to avoid mail-in voting if you can. And here we are in Maricopa County as of 2020 with 80% of the people registered in Maricopa County to send their vote in by mail. Now that a lot of that got established just because as a matter of convenience during COVID-19, but now the county claims that 80% of the population wants this. Just because they're signed up for it doesn't necessarily mean that they want that, but that's the situation that we're stuck in right now. And the flaws, the things that make this process weak are in signature verification and that whole process of bringing the ballots in and legitimizing them. So that's what I think is should be the main focus of what the public needs to hear about.
So, you know, many people may not realize this, but ballot harvesting has existed, you know, for generations. This isn't something new.
Right.
We actually had a case here in Arizona, Guillermina Fuentes, who was busted running a ballot harvesting ring, her and one of her cohorts. And this operation got caught in the primaries by our current county recorder in Yuma County, Arizona, during the primary of 2020. The investigation was prolonged to such an extent that they didn't even issue indictments until after the 2020 election, which means this ballot harvesting operation was able to continue all the way through the 2020 general election. So, you know, one of our I'm going to use a little sarcasm, our favorite former county recorder, Stephen Richer, he put out a statement on Twitter. Do you remember that, Chris, about ballot harvesting? Do you remember kind of the context of that?
Are you sure that case that you just mentioned isn't a one-up? Are you sure that ballot harvesting really exists? Because, you know, like our friend Stephen Richer said, it's harder to find a Sasquatch than it is to find or easier to find a Sasquatch than it is to find ballot harvesting. That's what I remember he said. So do we have something about that?
We do. So We the People Alliance issued a video back in, I believe it was 21, 22, after Stephen Richer put out this tweet about it's easier to spot. I think it's easier to spot a Sasquatch than it is a mule.
A mule,
Right?
that's
and
right.
It was
Easier
kind
to,
of making
that's right.
fun of the 2000 Mules movie.
That's right.
Right?
Thank you.
And so what we did, for those of you that don't know, one thing our organization does is we capture all of the live feed video footage that comes out of not only Maricopa County, but many different county elections departments. And there happened to be a camera on a ballot drop box. And we did catch that footage during the 2022 election. So that would have been 23-ish, I think, is when we made this video. Steve, can you play number one? How secure is it really? So here's the tweet where he's talking about making movies of Sasquatch.
There's our friend right there. Here's the video that we captured.
Now, I can't imagine a legitimate reason that an individual voter would be that masked up and carrying a box of ballots unless he was potentially muling. So we're going to go ahead and let this roll in the background so that we can kind of talk you through it. But what this is essentially 8 minutes of nonstop people going through the Maricopa County drop box, dropping off quite a few ballots. Now, in the state of Arizona, we actually have an anti-ballot harvesting law. So unlike some other states, it's actually illegal to harvest ballots in Arizona.
You can bring in ballots for your family members.
Right. And what is that kind of limited to? When you say bring in ballots for your family members.
For your household. Yeah.
Right. So I can't go get Tia and my uncles and all my cousins and drive around town gathering up all those ballots, Chris. Would that be ballot harvesting?
Yeah, that sounds like ballot harvesting to me. And here we have some pretty big families pretty big households represented by these stacks of ballots going into the drop box. I think we'll see one here later in the video where there's he only puts in part of them. Has some reserved. Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah, there's literally, and like Chris said, we'll come to it, but there's one we'll point out to you when we get there where they dump in several ballots, quite a few ballots, and you can see that the passenger sitting in the passenger seat still has a stack of ballots that they intend to, I would assume, take to another drop box, or maybe they're just going to do the loop and get back in line. I'm not really sure what the intent is. Some of these you're looking at 4, 5, 6 ballots. Some of them are 2-3 inches thick, and they're putting in, easily probably 10 to 12 ballots at a time with some of these stacks. And if you notice, we did blur faces of some of these.
Now look at
people.
that stack. There we go.
How many would you guess that is, Chris?
Oh my gosh, that's got to be at least 10, maybe 20.
Yeah, that's a pretty thick stack. And you'll see quite a few of these people are very heavily
look at that
masked.
Same thing.
And so this was during 2022. So, if this was footage from 2020, it might make a little more sense, you would think, if so many people were wearing masks and cinched up hoodies back in 2020. Here's the one we were referring to. If you notice that image of the passenger still holding a stack of mail-in ballots. Now, they've pulled up to the drop box,
putting in a
And
pretty big stack,
yeah.
and still have some left over for what else? For another drop box?
And you'll see it again. It's going to flash in that window just for anybody who's skeptical and thinks that maybe we didn't catch it. You can see those ballots showing up again in the window, and they're going to drive off. So we know that ballot harvesting is an issue. And when you talk to people who maybe concede that some fraudulent ballots or forged ballots get into the system, they always say, but that's okay because we have the final line of defense to protect the voters from that kind of voter fraud. And that process is called signature verification. Chris, you want to tell everybody what that process looks like? What is the signature verification process?
Yeah, sure. So let's kind of follow the life of a ballot. So after you put a ballot into the mailbox or into a drop box like this, well, specifically into the mail. If you put it in the mail, the first stop obviously is the local post office. It finds its way there. Now, the law requires that the county take possession of those ballots at that point from the point of the post office. What they actually do is they send employees over to the post office to pick up the ballots at the post office and take them directly to Runbeck. So it's really Runbeck who takes possession of them first, although technically, officially, the county takes possession of them because it's the county employees who pick them up. Now, they're supposed to count those ballots when they pick them up. They don't count them at the post office. They don't count them when they drop them off at Runbeck. They count them after they have, Runbeck actually does the count of the ballots after they receive them. So that's really the first time they get counted. So there's really no chain of custody in between the post office and Runbeck.
Now, for those people that believe that there is a process at the post office, they're not counting those ballots at all at the post office. Is that correct, Chris?
They're not counting the ballots at the post office. They're not even scanning them. The normal process for mail is for the post office to scan them. And for some reason, the post office has decided that ballots are an exception to that. They don't even scan the ballots when they come through the mail process like they do regular mail. You would think that they would be more careful with ballots, but they have a lighter process on processing or scanning and evaluating ballots when they come in.
So what you're seeing right here before we fade out of this is Christy Passarelli, Ray Valenzuela, and some other workers actually gathering the ballots out of the drop box. So these are the county workers and the process that they're using to pull all of those ballots that you saw going into that box out of the box to take it into the elections department. Now, this process would normally result in sealing that bin with security tags and signing some chain of custody for at least two people to sign it. And then that box would be taken in, and at the time that it was actually counted, transported, etc., scanned and transported, those logs would be verified and it would be open. They actually don't seal this bin, and they wheel it into the elections department where it sits in a hallway unattended for several hours before those ballots are pulled out of that bin. So you can see the bin right there. That's another camera view when it's coming into MTech. It had sat there, if you look at the timestamp, 9:15:32. So they collected those ballots at 7 p.m. And at 9:15, that bin was finally attended to. So, how secure is it really? That is the question. Is ballot harvesting real, Chris, or would you put your money on the Sasquatch?
Well, yeah. I think it's going to be easier to find that evidence of ballot harvesting. The problem is that the county isn't more careful. They're less careful about the way they handle ballots. The post office isn't more careful. They're less careful than they could be. There's lots of areas for improvement and lots of areas that are vulnerable, especially when it comes to chain of custody. So we got started by talking about the life of a ballot. So once it gets to Runbeck, the next thing they do is they bring those ballots in and they scan them, and they're scanning them, taking a picture. They're scanning the barcode on the ballot, and they're also taking a picture of the signature on the ballot, and then they set all those ballot affidavit envelopes aside, and they transmit the pictures of the outside of the envelope, including the picture of the signature, over to MCTEC. And then that's where signature verification comes.
And for those that may not know, MCTEC is Maricopa County Election and Tabulation Center. So it's actually the county elections department. MTEC is a word that we use to describe it. It's kind of shorthand. It's internal language. So
right. Yeah, that's the picture of what you just saw, the inside of MCTEC on that last video. So signature verification takes place there. And okay, so it's a 3-step process. But before that, actually, let me back up a little bit. They hire just regular people to do first level to do signature verification. They hire people who are, patriots, who care about the process, who want to be involved, and so they sign up to do signature verification.
Now, are these all just patriots who want to get involved, or because I know
that's the first
they
category.
actually, right, that's the main category. That's the category we know and love, and we have many friends who actually do that.
That's right.
But there's also the category of temporary workers that they hire from temp agencies, right?
Yeah.
Who may not even be politically minded or engaged or even care. They're just collecting minimum wage.
Their primary motivation, of course, is to just have a job. So the staff is split between those two groups. There's the group of people who are there because they care about the process and they want to be sure that the ballots get counted correctly. And then there's the other group who is there. They may or may not care about the process, but their primary motivation is that paycheck because that's how they entered the process as a temporary worker. So, okay, so that's how the people are. That's the kind of people. That's the people who are doing signature verification at the first level. So now there's 3 levels of signature verification. First level is those people who have the first look at the ballot, and they do a comparison between the picture of the ballot affidavit envelope, that signature, and the full reference file of signatures available from voter registration, previous elections, other kinds of documents that have come into the recorder's office with the user signature on it. So there's lots of exemplars and references that they compare to. Now, I'm describing the ideal case here. So then the next level is, let's say that the signature verification person at level 1 looks at that signature and they say that looks like a match. So that's good enough. So once it's been matched at that first level, it goes on to be opened and counted, and that ballot gets pulled out of the envelope and counted.
And let me just add something to that for people that know. What they're actually looking at in Maricopa County is they're looking at a scanned image of that ballot affidavit envelope. Once it gets approved and accepted, then the physical ballot is transferred from Runback Election Services to Maricopa County. But in the interim, while the ballot is being inspected and signature verified, it's being housed in the warehouse at Runback. Now, in your more rural counties, they actually have the physical envelopes, but in Maricopa County, the physical envelopes are maintained off-site at Runback Election Services when that first level verification occurs, where they either approve it, as Chris had just said, or exception it. And then what happens if they exception it, Chris?
Right. So at that level, they don't call it a reject. If they don't think the signature matches, what they call it is an exception. So they establish whether or not it passes, or a good signature, GS for good signature, or whether it's EX for exception. So if it's been accepted, and that's similar to the first level person saying, I think that's not a good match, it goes on to second level. Now, second level is populated by people who like long-term employees of the county, people who've had long-term experience in signature verification, and also people who came from the first level signature verification from that original population, who maybe have more experience. This is like their second or third year doing signature verification. They promote them up to what they call manager's level at second level to do the final verification of whether or not they feel that signature matches.
And what's different other than what you would maybe consider the experience of the signature verifier at that second level? What else about the process is different?
They have more exemplars, more sample signatures from the file available to them. The first level has 3 signatures. Depending on the year, actually, it could be 1 signature or 3 signatures. I think currently level 1 is 3 signatures, and after that, level 2, the manager's level, has all of the signatures available to them to do an evaluation of that of the signature affidavit envelope. So that's one of the other differences.
And so, what happens at that second level if a manager says, no, I agree with the first level, this is just not a match? Then what happens to that ballot?
If they feel like there is a match in the list of exemplars or list of sample signatures, then they'll approve it, give it a GS rating, a good signature rating. And if they also agree, or if they agree with with the first level, then they'll give it a QS, or a question signature, and then it has to be sent on to a process called curing. So in curing, and we're going to get into this more later. I mean, it's worth the conversation. But curing involves actually calling the voter or emailing the voter to tell them, hey, we got a ballot here with your name on it, and we feel like the signature doesn't match. We need your word on whether or not to accept this ballot. So that's the process as defined. That's the ideal process. So now we can talk about the practice.
Right. So in an ideal world, that process isn't so bad.
That's 3 levels of evaluation. I forgot to mention, I actually have the training manual here. So I actually took the training with the county for signature verification. This is Katie Hobbs' original. When Katie Hobbs was the Secretary of State, she wrote the manual, or had the manual written for signature verification, and we went through it, and it's actually a very good forensic lesson on how to do signature verification. They give you 4 hours of training at the county, and nobody can become an expert in 4 hours, but it makes a very good attempt at making people as expert as possible. At least they give them the information on how it's actually done, even if they don't give them the opportunity to have years of experience to be able to be good signature verifiers.
And for those of you that got heartburn when you heard Katie Hobbs's name, I want to point out that many of the examples in this manual, most of this training actually came from the EAC and CIS, and it was the adopted manual for Colorado elections. Not like they're much better, but Katie Hobbs, didn't go get her doctorate in signature verification and actually authored this manual. It was part of her duties as Secretary of State, but I'm sure people with much more experience and wisdom actually wrote this manual. And so when Chris is saying it's very good and very well written, I just don't want to, make anybody feel anxious about the fact that Katie Hobbs did something well.
We've relieved that anxiety for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the training is very good, but here's some of the problems. The actual practice of signature verification. When they do the ballot, when they scan the ballot affidavit envelope at Runback, they scan it at very low resolution. It's about between 300 and 320 DPI, so it's very low resolution. But not only is it just low resolution, but they take out all of the grayscale. They take out all of the color, and they take out. They even take out some of the black. If you've got wide lines, they take out the middle section of that black. So let's say you signed with a Sharpie or a thick black pen. It's going to look like it's going to look like they're made out of, the signature's made out of bars, like it's hollow in the middle, right?
Or like if you're using that MVD digital pad to sign, as many people do, that sometimes can already look really thick and blobbish.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Well, that's another part. That's another problem with the process. Okay, so the signature verification that comes from Runback is very low resolution. So those files end up being like 15 to 17 bytes. They're tiny, tiny little files. And I think maybe the original excuse for lowering the resolution is they had to transmit these across town. But with today's technology and being able to transfer things over the internet, I mean, there's really no excuse for taking out all of the detail from those signatures. So actually, the manual talks about local features and broad features of a signature, and it includes things like pen lift, hesitation, pressure. So all these subtleties, if you take out the grayscale and you take out the color, all these subtleties go away. And so the training is good. It teaches you to look for things that are no longer present in the signature. So that's the problem with the signatures coming over from Runback. The problem with the signatures, the exemplars, is basically the same thing. If you've got a hand-signed form that they scan and then put into the record, they lower the resolution, so you've got only the black version of that signature. You've got no detail that you can use your training to detect differences in the signature. The other problem is many of the incoming signatures today come from the DMV, and when you go to the DMV, you're signing on one of those digitizer pads, and everybody knows how hard it is to represent your actual signature on a digitizer pad. In fact, the actual training talks about the fact that if you don't have elbow support and you're not on a flat surface and you're not signing with a normal pen on a flat surface, then those are all reasons that the signature is going to look different. So it's a worst case scenario at the DMV when they force you to provide an exemplar that's done on a digitizer pad. So now you got a problem with the incoming signatures in the affidavit envelopes, and you got a problem with the exemplars. It's very hard to legitimize a match when you take out all that detail, especially since the training includes all those details that you can look for.
Now we have an example of both a ballot affidavit envelope and an exemplar that we can show people to and you can kind of walk through what that resolution is like. Do you want me to?
Yeah, let's bring it up.
Can we bring that up? Image 1X, please. So once we have a system that's kind of already from the very get-go designed to fail, and it's the 1A,
1B,
1X, 1XB, it's all the way at the end. Should have been the last one. No, that's a different one. There's a 1XA. Okay, it's titled, that's a good question. I added it in later. It's on your I think low resolution. So while we're waiting on that, we had kind of a unique opportunity, right, to look at some of these images in a way that I don't think historically anybody else has been able to do. You want to kind of talk about, well, let me start off by saying we knew there were problems. We had some evidence that there were significant problems in voter registration was really one of the number one things we were looking at the time. And we sat down with Senator Karen Fann, who was the Senate president at the time, right?
Let me touch on just a couple more things before we get to
sure.
Yeah. Okay, so some other problems with the signature verification process.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you got it. Great. We found it. Actually, I'm pretty sure Steve found it. Okay, so on the left, you see the picture of the ballot affidavit envelope. That's the picture that comes from Runback. And you can see that this is not a picture of somebody's handwriting. It's like I said, it's low resolution where they take out all the grayscale and the color, and they even take out the black in large black lines. Those arrows, the arrow pointing to the left and the arrows pointing down, and the wording up at the top, those are all fully black. And so that's an example of how they even take out some of the black in the picture to save file space. And again, these are 15, 17K files. They're tiny by the time they take all this out. Oh, and one more. Okay, so on the right is an example of a signature that came from the DMV, and it's hardly readable at all. This is an example of a clear mismatch between the two, but even if there were more similarities, it's very difficult to use the signature on the right that came from the DMV, from the digitizer, to use that as an exemplar. It's just so small, it's thick, it's pixelated. So you have really a worst case scenario just from the start in being able to do signature verification well. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so the workers. So they ask the workers to do signature verification for at least a full week, if not a full month. They don't take part-time employees, and they ask people to either take a week off work or they're limited to people who are retired. So that right from the get-go, they make it difficult for the general public to participate. They limit it to just the people who have a lot of extra time on their hands to be able to commit to a week or 2 or 4 to be able to do signature verification. I think that if they had the opportunity, that they should just bring on people who are willing to do it part time, and cyclists, they have a lot more people to be able to cycle through that process if they allowed that, and then. The accepted, well, we'll talk about that later. The accepted signatures, no matter how good or bad they are, go into the record of exemplars for the future. But we can talk about that in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about.
Yeah, so let's talk about what happened. So we were able to gain access to what we believed was about, I think at the time we thought it was about 120,000 ballot affidavit envelopes. And once we were authorized by the Senate to have access to this, we recognized that the drive seemed to be way larger than the files we were looking at. And at that point, Chris, you want to tell them,
Sure.
What you found?
Sure. This information came as a result of the Arizona audit. So it was in possession of the Senate, and we were able to, the Senate gave it to us to evaluate. And what we found was that that the reference images, about 5.3 million reference images, were also on the drive, along with the 1.9 million ballot affidavit envelope. So we had the opportunity to completely redo signature verification for Maricopa County, which we did. We set up a process at a secure location using a secure server. And at the secure location, we gave everybody the same training that was in the signature verification manual that was given to the county. And we had our people redo signature verification just the way it was instructed by the county. We built the software. The screens that were used for this were secure and could only be accessed from the locations where we had them. And what we found was, you want to give some of the data that we got out of that evaluation?
Absolutely, sure. So one of the number one things we were asked to do is report to the Senate with some of the findings that we had in this audit that we were commissioned to do. Steve, can you put up slide number 2, please? Some of the overall findings, and we're not going to go into all the details of everything today, but in ARS 16550, it states very clearly that if a ballot affidavit envelope is not signed, it must be signed by 7 p.m. on election day or the vote can't count. There is no provision to cure that or make it better aside from actually having it signed or having the voter go into the polling center. And we found several unsigned ballots that were cured and counted. In addition, we found many that were signed by somebody completely other than the voter. These aren't forgeries. We're looking at voters where it's a completely different name, such as the exemplar you saw earlier that Chris talked about. Those were clearly 2 different people signing, and that ballot affidavit was counted. We found scribbles and X's and illegible and inconsistent scribbles and marks that weren't constituting signatures, that were inconsistent with special election policy, violating ARS 16549. We found many duplicate voters, and yes, it can happen regardless of what the county tells you. People can vote more than once in the election, and there are many different ways that can occur. We found unreasonably different control signatures, and we found signatures, obviously, that didn't match, but then they matched several months later. And I think all the way down to the bottom, most importantly, we found a significant number of what we call egregious signature mismatches. And altogether in our findings, we found that ultimately at least 9 to 10% of the ballot affidavit envelopes that were accepted in the 2020 election should never have been counted. Now, how many ballots were cast in the 2020 election, Chris?
It's 1.9 million. I don't remember the exact number, but yeah,
1.9.
Yeah.
So if you take 10% of 1.9.
Yeah, easy math, 10% of 2 million. Yeah, 200,000.
Right.
And we found an additional 10%, 10 to 12% that weren't clear egregious mismatches, but they failed the Secretary of State standards according to the manual. So those would have been rejected at least initially. And so 20% of 2,400,000 ballots that should have been at least questioned, with 200,000 being egregious mismatches. That's the data that came out of our evaluation. We actually got through about half of them, but our numbers were very consistent all the way through.
So can we put up image number 3, Steve? This is another example similar to what you looked at earlier of what we called a mismatched signature.
Yeah, I call that egregious. I would say that exemplar on the right and the ballot affidavit envelope signature that came in through the mail with that signature, I don't think those matched. And those were approved. That envelope was approved for a vote in 2020.
And I want to add, it was approved in the first level of verification. This did not go through curing. And yes, we can tell because the metadata will tell us if a ballot is exceptioned in first or second level, it's actually dispositioned in the system to show that. And that ballot affidavit envelope is then approved and rescanned through the system. So I know one of the arguments the county has used when they've seen some of our findings and stats is, well, there's something called curing. Yeah, we understand that. We're quite familiar with what curing is. And we'll go into more detail on that next week, along with showing you how we can tell whether a ballot went through curing or not, to debunk some of that. Steve, can you put up image 4, please? Now, duplicate voters, this is something that we want to get into way more detail about in a future podcast and really dig deep into the data. This is sort of Chris's expertise, is duplicate data, duplicate voters. But here is an example of a voter who you can clearly see by the handwriting in the last 4 digits of the number and the signature and even the handwriting of the date that this is the same person signing both ballots. One was submitted on October 21st of 2020 and the other on October 30th of 2020. And both of these ballot affidavit envelopes, both of these ballots were counted. Now you can see the big boxes with the bold outlining. I just want to point out to you guys, our images of that do not look like that. That is to redact any personal protected information to protect the identity of these voters.
Yeah, to be specific, could you bring that up real quick? I just want to make clear that a lot of people call these clone voters. There's the word duplicate is used in other places in elections, so we call these to distinguish these. These are clone voters. So what this is in this case, it's the same name, the same address, same birth date, different voter IDs. So it's really a clone of the same voter record with 2 different voter IDs, and both voter IDs came in with envelopes, with signatures, and both votes were counted in this case.
Can we go ahead and switch it to slide 5, please, Steve? Here's another example coming up on the screen of a duplicate voter. This particular voter, you can look at it. The handwriting, I believe, is similar enough where you can pretty much easily tell that the same person authored both these envelopes. Now, I just want to point out, we don't
different dates.
We don't know whether it's the actual voter who signed both these ballot affidavit envelopes, but what we know is it's the same voter who's voting. These could be forgeries, that we can't say for sure, but one came in on October 22nd, 2020 for this voter, and then an additional one on October 28th, 2020 for the same exact voter. And again, would this be another example of what you're calling a clone voter?
Yeah, exactly. So 2 different voter IDs, but most of the other data is exactly the same. That's how we found it. And then because we had access to the ballot affidavit envelopes, we were able to actually compare the signatures. In this case, we knew from the data that both voters got counted, and we knew from the data that they were cloned. But here we're actually able to see the signature and see how similar they are.
So now when we talk about, the stats that we found, and that is that 9 to 10% were egregious, right? And Chris pointed out that mismatched signature I referred to, he considers that egregious. I do as well. It falls into more than one category. It's just a lovely array of things. But we also have another category that was 11%. Is that correct, Chris? Which is the failed Secretary of State standard.
10 to 12%.
Right. So these are another 10 to 12% in addition to the egregious. So that's for a total of 21% of the ballots that failed Secretary of State. But we don't consider these egregious because it could be the same voter with disintegration due to age. It could have to do with the resolution. There's a lot of factors here. But these are ones that
let's take a look at
could
6.
Potentially fail.
There it is.
And so here's one. If you, at first glance, you look at this and it doesn't really look much like a match, right? Even the way that the person dates their registration form on the right versus the way they dated their ballot affidavit envelope is different. But there are some distinctions that may indicate it's the same voter. So this isn't even considered egregious.
Yes, the point is that this should have been questioned and wasn't. This passed right through the system in 2020.
This did not go to hearing, correct?
Right.
Right. So this is an example of the other 10%. So if you combine ones that we found that look like this with ones that we found that are egregious, you're looking at 20% of the ballots that just didn't have appropriate careful consideration or somehow didn't follow the law. Can you go ahead and put up number 7 for me, Steve? And we've got many of these images. We're just zeroing in on ones of great interest. You want to tell everybody about this one, Chris? Why don't you talk about this one?
I have to analyze this for a minute to see if I see a match here. Okay, I'm done. I don't see a match here. In fact, it's almost like they were joking when they put this signature on the envelope. There's no similarities at all between the reference signature and those what they're calling a signature on that envelope.
Are those S's, would you say, on that ballot affidavit envelope?
Yeah, it's something, a stylistic S, something about that. I don't know.
Does this particular voter that we're looking at, does either their first or last name begin with an S?
Oh, good point. Yeah. No S's in that name. And you're that's right. Yeah, those look like S's. That's right.
And did this ballot affidavit go to curing?
It did not. It did not. It got accepted.
Okay. Go ahead and put up number 8 for me, Steve. And we're kind of flying through these because we really just want you guys to have an idea.
And I got the point, right?
Same here. Here's another egregious. I think you kind of get the point here. I don't know if that's a double L, a double S, a double heart, kissy fish. I'm not really sure what that is on the left. But as you can clearly see, there's not a lot of similarities between the ballot affidavit envelope and the exemplar on file for this particular voter. You can go ahead and take it down, Steve. So, once we looked at all of these results, we thought to ourselves, how are they signature verifying 1.9 million ballots, or in the case of 2022, 1.3 million ballots in not 29 days. It's actually less than 29 days because they don't work every single day with, just a handful of employees. How is this process really working? And so we decided to compare our signature verification audit and the results of timing from a conscientious trained signature verifier and compare it to what it would take to actually accomplish the work that the county has to do. Steve, can you put up slide 9? So one of the things we pointed out, and this is in reference to the 2022 election, I want to be really clear, there were 1.3 million mail-in ballots or in-person early ballots that came in for that election. Maricopa County had 28 signature verification workstations. 25 of them were dedicated to signature verification and 3 of them for curing. And they worked 2 shifts. It was 7 hours plus 3.5 hours. So there was a 7 hour shift and a 3.5 hour shift, which equated to a 10.5 hour work day at each station. And there were 19 days of work starting on October 18th of 2022. And if you do the math on this, it just doesn't seem possible, does it, Chris?
Yeah, well, it certainly raised the question. And we asked ourselves, is there any way to find out how long it actually took people to do this, how many people worked how many hours, and we kind of theorized that data is there. So what we did is we public record requested whatever the file was that was used to record signature verification. We knew it was all done on computer, and we thought there's a very high likelihood that they're taking data as each person is doing a verification. And it turns out that it was. It took us. I love telling this story, so I'm going to try and tell it short. Some other time we'll do the whole thing. But we did the public records request. They responded by saying, "Well, this report doesn't exist, so we're non-responsive." And we told them that we were aware that the Attorney General, previous Attorney General, had written an opinion that you don't need to be in possession of a report to be able to have to produce it for a public records request. You just had to have custody of the data. And so now we know they have custody of the data. So we negotiated through the process and finally helped them create a report that had all the information that we were looking for in it. And what we learned in that process is they had never created that report before, right? Because we helped them create it the first time. So in that report, we got all the information that we needed to be able to calculate the time in between evaluations. Every time and a person at first level and second level touched an envelope, we were able to establish the amount of time that they took to determine a disposition, whether it's approved or exception or whatever the disposition.
And as we
be.
move forward, you'll hear us refer to this in both today's podcasts and then when we return to get into more of the details next week as timing data. So when you hear us talk about timing data, this is the data that Chris is referencing.
That's right. So let's see. Okay. So we have some examples of what we discovered was there are several people doing what we would expect them to do, and they're doing the same kind of thing that we did in our evaluation of the envelopes. They're looking at the signature, comparing to the exemplars, and coming up with some kind of a failure rate. And if they're taking their time to look at the signatures carefully, it could take anywhere between so let's say 10 and 30 seconds to do a really good evaluation. Once you get good at it, you can go faster. So we found several people taking several seconds per evaluation, and they had a rejection or an acceptance rate, a pass rate of in the range of 80 to 90%. So
which is consistent with our audit, is that correct?
That would be consistent with our findings, with our people doing it without the pressure of having to have it done, without everybody waiting for the election results to come in. So we found many people doing that, but then we also found people just clicking the accept button as quickly as the screen would update, which is not doing signature verification. And this is the kind of data that we took to the Kari Lake trial.
And just so you guys know, I want to make it clear to everybody, we didn't just take this timing data at face value either. It was analyzed very heavily. And one thing that we did, if you remember, I had told you earlier in this podcast, we capture all of the live feed video footage from the elections department. So we scoured through video footage and we compared what we were seeing visually with our eyes to what the data was telling us. So Chris would say, at this point in time, this guy is doing this or this gal is doing this. And we would look through the video footage to find somebody that very specifically matched all the way down to their break time to ensure that the data was actually accurate.
That's
and
right.
It was provably accurate. And it was honestly one of the few things I don't think the county has ever really been able to dispute with us is that, our method and process was extraordinarily accurate and,
Yeah.
and methodic. So
Exactly. So
uh,
we were able to find some of these people on camera doing what we could see them doing in the data. So if you want to bring up 21, oh, I'm sorry, 11.
we don't want to do
User
the video,
21.
number 10?
Of
Yeah, let's
course.
do
So
10.
Let's do 10. Yes, of course. Oh, yes. And here we are. You're going to see the person we
Comparito
found.
literarum. So, like I said, you can see the nap time here.
That's right. You can see the gap in the data where he's not doing any evaluations. And we use that as kind of a pinpoint to establish the correlation between the data. And I got to give credit where credit's due. It was Steve who actually found correlation between the data and the video. Steve, our producer, right here in the room.
So when you're looking at the screen, I want to point out the bottom left tiny little box that you see on the bottom left of the monitor, that is the exemplar, or the signature from the voter registration. And
now look how quickly he's clicking. See how fast this
the
number
page
goes
isn't
up?
even loading. There's no way there's comparison happening here.
Yeah. Ballot envelope on the top, exemplar on the lower left. It's funny that the exemplar is such a smaller screen. And here we have his graph of his work. So we'll take another look at the graph here in a minute. Statute says compare, and is that really comparing when you rip through the speed click through those so quickly? Mail-in voting is safe, secure, and valid. Our friend Stephen Richer.
So that's a little taste of some of what we were able to discover comparing this timing data to the videos. And yes, thank you, producer Steve. You want to say hello to everybody? Say hi to everybody, Steve, for putting that video together. And I'm sorry that Chris and I jabber-jawed through the whole thing because it's actually kind of funny. It's got this whole Elmer Fudd thing going on. But hello, Steve.
There it is.
So Steve put that video together for us. So thank you, Steve. So what else were we able to do with with the timing data, Chris? Like,
so
how did we map that?
We graphed that so that you rather than looking at raw data, you can actually look at a picture that represents some of what we saw in the data. So let's take a look at number 11. Okay, so what we see on the left is the number of seconds that this person took to evaluate each of those signatures. Now, each dot, this is getting into the weeds. Each dot is 250 evaluations, and those are average of the average of the median. So, average of the mean. But anyway, what you see here is the number of seconds that it took this person to do the evaluation, and this person is up around 10 seconds per evaluation. That seems pretty reasonable. That seems pretty conscientious. And on the right, what you see is the average is 7.9 seconds, or 7.0 is 7.9.
7.9
seconds.
So this is pretty consistent with some of our better, well-trained staff when we performed our audit. Is that correct? Around 6 to 12 seconds, and then some of them took upwards to 30 seconds. But this is conscientious.
This is a conscientious user. It's a good example of conscientious user.
And how many ballot affidavit envelopes did they overall process?
It looks like they did, is that 36,000? 36,000, or is it 30,000? I can't read it.
It's either 35 or 36,000. Okay, 36,245. Thank you, Steve.
There's Steve.
And their overall acceptance rate here, when they were verifying, what was the percentage that they passed through first level?
See that top line up there is 100% pass rate. And so they're well below 100% there, and their average is 80% pass rate.
And that is also 100% consistent with our findings.
Very
is that correct?
Consistent with our findings. So this is a person who evaluated like most of our people did. Okay, so let's go on to the next one.
Congratulations, user 21, and thank you for being a patriot and understanding.
Come back next time.
Yes, please. I hope you've been invited back, and if not, reach out to us. We want you back in SigVer.
Okay, then user, let's see, number 12, please. Okay.
Well, this looks very different.
This is very different. So what we see on the left is they take mostly about 2 seconds, an average of 2 seconds. to do their evaluation. So they're only pausing. It takes the screen about a second to upload, to refresh from the last signature. And so they're taking only about a second or two to look at each one of these signatures. And then on the right, they have a pass rate of about 98%.
98.9%.
Yeah, about 99% pass rate, which is not reasonable. What we saw throughout our evaluations is that the data was very homogeneous. There wasn't some parts where there was a lot of mismatches and some parts where there weren't very many. It's all the way through this. There were about the same number, about the same pass rate. So for anybody to come up with a pass rate like this they're not being conscientious. And we see number 13.
So 13 is my favorite. Yes,
Yeah.
this is Mr. Magoo.
This is a famous user number 134, who we have not named, although we know who our friend is. But this is the one from the video. This is the one from the video, and he took an average of 2.4 seconds to evaluate each signature, and his pass rate was 99%. And that's what we saw in the video. We saw him pressing the accept button as quickly as the screen would come up for most of the time that we watched him on the video. So this is not a person being conscientious. And unfortunately, we also saw managers pass by him several times in the video, and no manager ever stopped to correct or to advise him otherwise.
Now, I want to add here, too, that during the Kari Lake trial, and, I wish I would have brought that transcript up, but maybe we can next week. During the Kari Lake trial, Ray Valenzuela indicated that he was very familiar with this timing data and that they used it to do performance analysis on signature verification workers, which is quite ironic considering they didn't even know how to generate the report until Chris literally taught the IT team how to do that. So, a lot of contradictory behavior coming out of Maricopa County in this regard, right, Chris?
Yeah, they did say, Ray did say on the stand that he used this data to evaluate his employees, when we know that he produced this data for the first time as a result of the public records request. Another interesting fact is when we asked for this data for 2024, they said they had erased the algorithm to produce it. And so they had to redesign the algorithm from scratch, which means they weren't using this data after we taught them how to produce it. They had to reinvent the wheel when I asked for it again in 2024.
Now, I hate really beating a dead horse here, but I want to play you another video. It's a brief video. And this is signature verification occurring in Maricopa County compared to the timing data. Every single thing you see in here are all verifiers that verified at under 3 seconds on average evaluation. Steve, can you go ahead and put up 13X, please? XA, yes. So this is 90 seconds of the signature verification process of somebody conscientious and somebody unconscientious, right?
Oh, I wanted to mention that this is the same user. Now, this is a close-up of his screen, and it shows how fast he's clicking these off. I want to mention that we decided that it's really not the responsibility of the individual workers. It's the fact that they're trained and allowed to do signature verification like this, even with managers passing by and looking at their work. We get right next to each other. We have somebody very conscientious doing the work on the right and somebody just speed clicking on the left. And the fact that they're sitting right next to each other ought to be obvious to the manager if they were passing by to correct these. But the fact is that management did not disapprove of this kind of signature verification practice. So that's really who we hold accountable for this. And that's why we've protected the identities of the individual verifiers. Although I got to give congratulations to the one on the right, because she's definitely doing a good job of taking her time to evaluate the signatures. Look at how
I
carefully
want to
she's
point
doing that.
something out. So if you look at the exemplars that she's comparing it to, you will actually see her scrolling, which means she's looking at more than one. So if you look at this, hundreds of thousands of signatures in 2022 were verified in less than 3 seconds each, which means you couldn't have even scrolled to look at a secondary signature in that time. And the one individual verified 27,000 signatures with a 99% pass rate. And this user 134 was just one of many examples of this kind of behavior found in the data.
Yeah, and I want to mention too, now that we're talking about it, that in the process that we designed, we brought up all the exemplars at what would be the equivalent for level 1. I'm not sure why the county would limit the exemplars for level 1. Why wouldn't they let them see more than just the last 3 exemplars? And one of the problems with the process is only the latest exemplar comes up at the bottom of the screen. You have to be proactive. You have to take an initiative to scroll down and look at more than one. Even if you've got 3 available to you, the only one is initially available to see. Whereas in our process, we made them all instantly available every time a new signature came up. I mean, why not?
Another thing that I really want to point out here is that when you look at the process that we used, as Chris said, it's like your second level, and you look at the process they're using at the county, there really wasn't a lot of difference in how it was laid out, except for I think their ballot affidavit envelope signature was much smaller than ours were. And the time just wasn't possible. We did not see anywhere in any of our users, any of our auditors be able to verify hundreds and hundreds of signatures in just seconds flat. I personally did thousands of signatures during that audit, and I was probably one of the faster users by the end of the audit, and I couldn't keep up that pace at all, not doing it conscientiously. I think in an 8-hour shift, you could maybe do 700 to 1,000 max. And we've seen in the data where some people were doing over 8,000 signatures a day. And it's just not possible.
Yeah, it's not reasonable to imagine that they're doing any kind of evaluation or comparison as the statute requires. Yeah.
So we brought this issue up in the Kari Lake trial, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the talking points or the issues that kind of came up during that trial as far as the county's defense when it came to the presentation of this data?
Well, actually, let's take a look at the video, and then I'll kind of I'll tell you what they said in their statements during the trial. So let's bring up number 14.
Number 14. And we're going to be quiet through this one because there's a lot to hear.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Are we really supposed to believe that?
Very good.
Plaintiff's chain of custody claim seems to hinge on this notion that perhaps some number of ballots were injected into the batches at Runback. Even if there were 50, 500, 500,000 ballots somehow injected into the process, every ballot received by Maricopa County is processed, checked against the voter registration record to make sure the person hasn't already voted, and then verified by a multi-level signature review process. There is no evidence or even reason to believe that it had any effect on the number of votes lawfully counted.
Yes, the multi-level signature verification process. Multi-level sounds very impressive, doesn't it?
These are different signature verifiers. These are not all Mr. Magoo.
supposed to believe now? There's 274,000 crooks out there that all got hold, agreed envelopes. And so all these fake ballots got through? Are we really supposed to believe that?
Could those be those fake ballots?
Are we really supposed to believe that, Chris?
Right.
Are we
okay.
really supposed to believe that 200,000 ballots got through the system unchecked with such a beautiful system?
Are we supposed to believe that 200,000 egregious mismatched signatures made it
Look
through?
at that stack.
Yeah. So what we just heard there was the county saying, or the attorney saying that even if we had 500,000 fake ballots come into the system, we have the last line of defense, which is signature verification, multi-level signature verification. So even if we do have that many ballots, we have signature verification to protect us from that. And then what they implied at the end was, well, yeah, we have a bunch of people not doing signature verification very conscientiously. But even if we had some problems in signature verification, what are we going to assume that 50,000 or 500,000 ballots came into the system fraudulently? So really, it's a circular argument. They argue both sides without really being able to defend either one.
Yeah, this is, you could always trust your election department to lie, gaslight, and ridicule anyone who dares to question them. You know, it was interesting during that Kari Lake trial because Tom Liddy, who is one of the attorneys for the county, he actually went as far as to say that if voters were disenfranchised due to equipment failures in 2022, that was simply because Kari Lake and other people in the AZ GOP had the nerve to tell them not to vote by mail, not to vote early. That if they'd have just voted early and voted by mail, they wouldn't have had the problems on election day. So they went from blaming groups like ours and blaming Kari Lake for the distrust in the election. That's our fault. And then the disenfranchisement of voters, or the potential disenfranchisement of voters, that's our fault as well, right? Or that's the voters' fault, because if the voter would have just voted the way they wanted them to, instead of what is constitutionally available to them,
right,
they wouldn't have suffered so many issues in 2022. I'm speechless on that. But
well said.
So we have a little bit of surprise. I dropped my earpiece, but that's okay. I'll find it in a minute. We were able to get the 2024 timing data, weren't we, Chris? After all, do you want to talk about? I think it came in a little different this time, right?
The 2024, yeah, we have the. Are you asking about the 2020 or the 2024?
Well, we've got the 2024 that we're still analyzing, right?
That's right.
And we're going to bring that up next show.
That's right.
What about 2020? What was there anything profound in the 2020 data that you want to talk about tonight?
I'm gonna just give you a little teaser here with a couple things we want to talk about next time. In the 2020 data, we found that the first 1.2 or 1.3 million ballots came through the process without a single exception or without a single failure. Now there's
so are you saying the first 1.2 million people that got their ballot in, they're just all really honest people?
Yeah, well, like I said, you know, that's when the honest people voted.
Right.
So there were no fraudulent ballots in that first 1.2 million, and then it wasn't until the latter 700,000 that team started to see some problems with those ballots. So we're going to talk more about that next time, and we'll show you some data and give you some detailed information on that. The other thing that we're going to talk about next time is step 3 in signature verification. We talked about level 1 and level 2, and
sorry about that.
Let's put up a graphic.
Yeah, producer Steve is crawling around the floor looking for my earpiece, and I found it. I found it.
That's perfect.
Sorry.
This is live broadcast.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay, we're also going to talk about step 3 of the signature verification process, which is curing, and we're going to talk about the intent and the actual practice the same way we did about signature verification. And I think this is the most important potential flaw, or the most important part of the process where they can catch errors if they do it right. I mean, if the process is good, then it can be one of the most important parts of the process. But according to practice, it can be also one of the most dangerous. So that's what we're going to talk about next time.
Well, and we the People USA Alliance, we're responsible for speaking out about mail-in voting and about the signature verification process, but we're not the first ones to do this. Over the course of history, since mail-in ballots were incorporated back in the 90s, there has been several prominent people that have spoken out about mail-in ballots, including Jimmy Carter and the Carter Center, right? I mean, Jimmy Carter was talking about the dangers of mail-in voting even as recent as 2005. I think Brian has some information on the Carter Center. Do you know if Brian's available? Have you talked to Brian, Steve? Yeah, let me see if he can hop on because I know he spent a lot of time.
I just
Yeah,
call
that's
call him
fine.
really quick, see if he can get on.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that at the very beginning, how people have been saying for decades that mail-in balloting is very dangerous practice. We're prone to the possibility of fraud.
Hey, Brian, hey,
Yeah, get on
I know
here.
you've Is it possible? Is it possible for you to hop on? Yeah. Hey, Steve, can you send Brian a link? Okay, he's going to shoot you a link straight away if you can hop on. And I'd love to hear kind of what you know about the Carter Baker report because I know we were talking about that and you were looking into it. So thanks. We'll see you soon. All right. Bye.
He's like out of town, isn't he? That's pretty nice of him to hop on.
Yeah, I think he's out of town. He's going to try and hop
Oh, well,
on. Oh,
clearly out of
hey.
town. You look out of
How
town.
y'all doing?
You look like you're in
I'm
a
a
mine.
I'm a ghost. No, I'm not in a mine. I'm actually down at the U.S. Mexico border, about uh, 15 miles east of Lukeville, I believe. Been running. Oh shit! Just tripped. Got my flashlight pointed the wrong way. Been running the border, California, Yuma to Ajo. Some really beautiful places out here. So yeah. Plus,
Wonderful.
I like to do what the signs tell you not to do, which is drive around not alone.
Are you one
So
of these
yeah.
guys, Brian, when they put up signs and say "Do not enter"? It makes you want to enter.
Oh yes. I mean, and that gets to Stephen Richer, right? And the current actual board of supervisors. They say do not enter, and it's like open that door. I want to see what's behind that door. So I don't know if
I
you
think
can
that's
see the
called
border wall behind me
an
here.
attractive nuisance, right?
Yeah, can you see
Doesn't
the
your
border
wife call
wall
you an
back there?
attractive nuisance?
Oh yeah,
Well,
there's the border wall.
nuisance. I don't know about attractive. Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
it
there's
is
the
it
border
is
wall right
dark,
there.
so that
Yeah,
will.
it got dark sooner than I thought it would. I guess I lost track of time. Yeah,
So
and so
What do
so
you know about
Brian,
Carter Baker?
what
what's that?
happened with the Carter Baker report in 2005?
Well, the whole issue was, looking at whether or not we could use mail-in voting as a legitimate, fraud-free form of voting, because a lot of states were making a shift to mail-in voting. Arizona actually was one of those. Arizona's actually been on the vanguard of mail-in voting. And I remember when it was really being pushed in the 90s. I worked for the Republican Party down in Pima County, and you could tell back then that it was just going to be rife with fraud. And so this commission gets together, James Baker, and Jimmy Carter, and they look at what the potential problems are with mail-in voting, and they basically conclude that we should stay away from mail-in voting because the potential for fraud is absolutely incredible. And I think we see that in Maricopa County. And I want to say kudos.
Nope, I think we lost Brian. Another thing, just an interesting point of fact to throw out there is that the Carter Center, when they issued this 2005 report, they also stated that mail-in ballot and early voting should not commence any greater than 15 days before Election Day, because it inadvertently harmed candidates because all of the information was not in yet. And voting too soon would cause people to vote in ways they wouldn't naturally vote because so much information floods in at the last minute. What is the voting period in the state of Arizona, Chris?
What is it? 28 days?
29.
29 days here in Arizona.
29 days of voting in Arizona. So, interestingly enough, are you going to pull him back in if he joins us again? Okay, we don't know if Brian's coming back, but the last thing that I kind of want to point out with this whole Carter Baker thing is, oh, okay, he's going to bring him back in.
What
Hello,
was
Brian?
I saying? Yeah,
Okay,
what
so
was I saying last? What was
you
I
were
saying
talking
last?
about how Carter and Baker, the Carter Center report in 2005, talked about the mail-in system being ripe with fraud. And I pointed out to everybody while you were gone that they also recommended that early voting never exceed 15 days. What else do you want to add about that report and Carter?
Well, I think it's interesting that, did I talk about Arizona and when it started doing it?
Yeah, in the 90s.
Yeah, so you get the 90s, and you could tell back then it was going to be rife with fraud. But what's really interesting is Jimmy Carter, who, of course, opposed mail-in balloting and excessive early voting, at the ripe old age of 95 years old, right, has a change of heart. And it's ironic that Jimmy Carter, a big Democrat, has that change of heart. What was it? Was it in May of 2020?
Right. It was
This
2
was
months before the primary of
right.
2020.
Yeah, and so that was, I mean, it's very telling in that you have this huge movement afoot in the United States, this huge anti-Trump movement afoot, and it's really telling that people like Adrian Fontes, right? Adrian Fontes just wanted to do carte blanche mail-in voting to every voter in Maricopa County. And thank God, people like Alex Cullinan, who really should be the Secretary of State, sued him and prevented that from happening. But push comes to shove in 2020, and you talked about all these numbers tonight, right, Chris? When it appears the fraud was taking place. Can you hear me, Chris?
There, I was muted for a second there.
I was wondering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah. So the
we
first
did talk about some of that.
1.2.
We've saved some of that for next broadcast, but yeah, we talked about some of that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so, it's just interesting that, all of these big name lefties have a change of heart, including the rhinos in 2020, right? And this was the big anti-Trump movement, right? The big anti-Trump push that took place in 2020 to ensure that Donald Trump would not win the presidency of the United States of America. And you know, I just want to talk about Stephen Richer, and I don't think we got to this in either of our last two podcasts with Kim. And one of them was a video we thought about playing, but I don't think we did. And it's Stephen Richer talking about all of the things he did to ensure that voters in Maricopa County could be sure that their ballot was counted. Do you recall that one, Shelby?
Oh yeah, most
Yeah, yeah.
definitely.
So they created this whole tracking system. You could track your individual ballot
Yeah,
through the
it's
postal
the
service. Right.
Be Ballot Ready.
Be ballot ready. Okay. And so, but Stephen Richer misses the entire point of mail-in voting, especially when you compound mail-in voting with voter registration signature fraud, right? When you start getting a significant amount of signature or voter registration fraud taking place, and there's nobody really checking the system, or you get the registration of illegal immigrants and other people that should not vote. And we can see what happened in Pennsylvania. They've got a big criminal investigation, I believe, that was just referred by the Pennsylvania legislature to the Department of Justice. And
Lost it.
so, the person that was doing that work out there that runs the company
Oh,
is actually out of Tempe, Arizona, used to work for Adrian Fontes when Adrian Fontes first became Maricopa County Recorder. And then
I
he went
also
out
want
and
to point
created
out,
fraud.
Brian, he's currently the vice mayor of Mesa, Arizona. So he
Right,
was working for
right,
Adrian Fontes, and now he's the vice mayor.
right. I wonder if he registered his own voters. Yeah. And so, it's just interesting that, after he leaves Fontes, what does he do? He goes out and creates these non-governmental organizations to register voters. And this is what we've been talking about our first two shows, right? Were the non-governmental organizations. And so, when you compound voter registration with this fraud, and then you compound it with just this really crazy permanent mail-in voting list, right? A lot of these people don't vote. And how hard would it be, Shelby? I mean, you've looked at the numbers. I've looked at the numbers. I've done, I've done these types of workups for candidates, but you can identify the voters who aren't going to vote, and you could if you could get their ballot and vote it. The problem is that look at 2020, right? You got 20,000 ballots show up after the election, and these are mail-in ballots. And so people's concern is not really, oh, well, I sent my ballot back, did it get counted? That's not really the big concern. The big concern is who has access to a large number of these ballots that can then be illegally voted. And we know Stephen Richer wasn't doing his job. We know they hire people, and they've consistently hired people that sit there to just go enter, 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 enter. And I think you're going to talk a lot about this in the next show next week. But when they just sit there and hit enter, 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 right? I started it at first by talking about Arizona is a voter ID state, right? You got to have ID in Arizona to vote when you go to the polls. Well, your signature on the mail-in ballot by law is your ID. That's your identification, right? And so when people are not actually validating that signature against the signature on the voter registration database, and we know they're not, because you cannot do their system as fast as many of these people that Chris has been able to show are actually doing it. And so, but I'm guessing this is why Stephen Richard doesn't want us to have the names of these workers. I would venture a guess that many of these workers are part of an NGO, and that NGO is probably very decidedly anti-Trump, anti-MAGA. And so, I don't want to spill the beans for anything we're going to talk about next week, but when you start just hitting enter, 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 you got problems because you're not validating the identification of the voter.
Well, and doesn't that equate to identity theft, Brian? If we're taking a
Well,
forged signature and putting it into someone's record, it's like stealing their
right.
identity, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I think we need to make clear to the listeners, is that what's actually taking place, and the law doesn't actually allow this. There is no provision in the law that I'm aware of that allows them to take a signature from a ballot affidavit envelope and enter it into the voter's registration record as a valid signature. But
Oh, we lost Brian again. Well, we've far exceeded an hour. So I guess it's time to let Brian get back to his border adventures and wrap things up. Do you want to tell the viewers that are left now what we plan to go into next week?
Well, I think we teased it a little bit. We're going to talk about the 2020 findings. We're going to show some graphs from 2020 and 2024. And we're also going to talk about the most important, the potentially safest and the potentially most dangerous part of signature verification, and that is curing. And I think that's it's going to be an important conversation. And we saved it for a show where we could spend some time on it.
So do you have any final thoughts for the viewers?
That's it. I'm looking forward to next time and being able to explain that.
All right. Yeah, bring Brian in so he can say goodbye.
yeah,
We were just
I
wrapping up.
well, I don't know how long I was gone, but what was the last thing I said?
Well, we were talking
And
about
then also,
identity theft, and you said that the law doesn't give a provision for
right.
them to take signatures and adopt them into the voter record.
That's 100% correct. But I just as a final thought, I bet you if we were to compare each voter's signatures that are in their voter registration database in their individual record, I bet we would start finding significant inconsistencies. And the problem with this is that if you get somebody that's conscientious, that actually does their job verifying signatures, trying to identify the identity of this particular voter, and they start looking at 3 signatures in some person's file, how are they to know which one's the correct one? And so what I think really needs to happen is something needs to happen to compel Maricopa County to purge all of those signatures from the voter registration database and simply use the one the voter used when they registered to vote. And this really should be a wet signature on a piece of paper that is then scanned in, because a lot of this I signed with my finger. It just looks like a McDonald's signature on the pin
Yeah,
pad.
we'll go into that in
Be
some
anybody.
detail next time. This idea
Yeah.
of putting an approved signature into the voter reference file, we didn't get into.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned that briefly.
I'd love to show some
Yeah.
images next week of
Yeah,
what a voter
exactly.
record looks like when it
Right.
has 5 different styles of signatures in one record, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll talk
Yeah,
about
and-
that
but-
next time in detail.
Yeah, but that's what's crazy about it. But I want to say again, Phenomenal work, Chris. We the People USA Alliance. We got to keep pounding. We got to keep pushing because this is the tool they're using to manipulate the outcome of our elections. And if you had access to 5,000 early ballots that you could then have your crew vote, your non-governmental organization, because we know this involves a lot of left-wing non-governmental organizations, then you could systemically change the outcome of elections. I mean, school board, board of supervisors, you could target one specific race and have an impact in that race. So good work, and thanks for bringing me on from down on the border. Sorry it's so dark. It's
Well,
actually pretty
enjoy
cool
your
down there.
time. Be safe out there.
Yeah.
Bring us
Oh
back
well, I don't know
pictures.
about.
We lost him again. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I think he's going to say being safe is overrated.
Final thoughts for me is, look, I've said this, I'm going to continue to say this. I don't believe Trump won in 2024 because the right figured out how to do ballot harvesting better than the left. I think it was a mandate from the American people that he won, and I don't think it had to do with the fact that mail-in ballot was a part of it. Mail-in ballots, by all regards, I believe, is criminal and an affront to the American people. And I will continue, as Chris will continue, and our organization will continue to point out these flaws. And join us next week because you're going to be really interested in finding out what 2020 and 2024 look like in comparison to the timing data for 2022, and to find out the impact of the timeline extension bill. And we'll get into that next week, right, Chris?
Exactly. Sounds good to me. Let's do that.
So be blessed and have a very wonderful rest of your Monday night, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, tell your neighbors. We'll see you next week.